What up, world history? This is Mr. View coming back at you live. No, this isn't really live, is it? It's kind of taped. Anyway, so far we've learned about a couple different things in this unit. Number one, we learned about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is the age of, what is it again in Reese? That's right, the age of reason. These people wanted answers for the things that they've been questioning all along, whether it was in the government or with religion. So that caused conflict between the Enlightenment thinkers, religious thinkers, and governmental people. So that was an issue. England became very view-like. That means powerful. Check out those guns. They became super strong because they were an island. It was good for imports and exports. They had a good business climate. They had some success in war, and so they became very powerful and made a lot of money at this point. They also, their government was a constitutional government. It became constitutional government. They still did have a monarch a lot of times at the top of this government, and they still do, right? Queen Elizabeth, she's the queen right now. Their constitutional government, though, has a prime minister, is like our president. The difference is they are the person with the majority of followers in their Senate slash House of Representatives, which is actually called their House of Commons and their House of Lords. So that's a significant difference between their prime minister and our president. Their prime minister can also go forever, whereas our president is limited to 2 terms, right? Prime minister, they can lead for 20 years if they want, or if their party stays in control. So that's a big difference between the United States and the English government. But we are also a constitutional government in the sense that we are limited by our Constitution. Our laws cannot go against our Constitution, in other words. Today we're going to be yapping about one of my favorite countries, Vive la France, right? View French, there you go. So Vive la France. At this time, they had a king and 3 estates. Their king were more powerful than the kings in England. There was not a constitutional government there yet. Okay, so they had 3 estates. It was kind of like a social structure, if you will. We learned about social structure. Remember that? We learned about the caste system where people couldn't go up and down in that system. This is slightly different. Okay, they have the first estate, which is the clergy. Clergy, that's a fancy word for church people. Right? The church people were the first estate. They collected tithes. So anybody that was Christian in that country paid a tithe. 10% of their income went to the church, which made the church a cold hard cash, right? They did not have to pay taxes. They were tax exempt. That kind of sounds weird, doesn't it? But churches in our country right now are still tax exempt. So go figure. They did not have to pay taxes. They ran schools, hospitals, orphanages, things like that. So they did a lot of good with that money. However, we know that if somebody has a lot of money, that tends to corrupt, right? And so there was some corruption within the church, and some of these church leaders were living very lavishly. They had big homes, they had nice fancy jewelry and dress, they ate really well, while some people were starving. So that didn't sit well with the common people. First estate was the clergy. The second estate, the nobles, the rich guys, right? These guys are the guys with titles and property. So they had a bunch of land and they had titles to go with it. Some of them had jobs, but not a lot of them. It was just an inherited kind of property, and with that, a lot of money. So they had the titles and the property. They also didn't have to pay taxes. Uh-oh, the rich guys didn't have to pay taxes. That wouldn't go over very well in our country right now. I'm sure of that. And it doesn't. When we hear that people got rich and they didn't have to pay taxes, we don't like that so much because everybody should have to pay their fair share. But the second estate back then, they did not have to pay taxes. They could hunt. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But that's a big deal. The third estate, that's people like me and probably like you. 98% of the population, and this was some upper class, but mostly middle class and peasants. So a lot of farmers, but a lot of common workers, if you will. This also included doctors and lawyers and things. So they were a learned group, if you will, but they were not equal by any stretch of the imagination. They had to pay all the taxes, right? Because we know that the first estate, clergy, second estate, nobles, did not have to pay taxes. So they came from somewhere. It was the common people, the third estate, 98% of the population, right? So they had to pay all the taxes. They couldn't hunt. And as I suggested earlier, this is a big deal because if you were a farmer, a peasant, or just had a large farm, you could not hunt the animals that were killing your crops. The animals get into farms, right? They eat the crops up. They couldn't do anything about it. They could not kill these animals that were killing their crops. And that was their life. That was their livelihood, especially in the winter if you didn't have that opportunity. And meat is a major staple in your diet. So if they can't hunt, that's an issue. That's a problem for them. As I said, they weren't equal. They had to work on stuff if bridges broke down or roads needed fixed. They were expected to fix those for free. It certainly wasn't going to be the rich guys, and it certainly wasn't going to be the church guys. It was going to be the common people, and those things were common necessities, right? The common people needed those, so they had to do it. Otherwise, they were going to go without. So they had to do all this stuff. That made the regular population, that 98%, that third estate, pretty unhappy, right? They got to pay all the taxes. They can't hunt. They got to work for free sometimes. That sucks. And that is not going to last very long. If 98% of your population isn't happy, that causes issues. That causes rebellion. That causes an overthrow sometimes of governments, right? If 98% of our population was unhappy with a law or a person, heads would roll. Guarantee, right? So we do that with even 50% of the population. So it was a bad, toxic environment in Vive la France at this time. The king needed some cold, hard cash, and they wanted to raise taxes, and they wanted to do some other things. So they called on these 3 estates to get together and talk about their grievances and how they could, maybe help the king out. So the first, second, and third estate met, and they kept voting on things. And the first and second estate, they got together like this. They said, we got to control the third estate. So what they did is they kept voting against the third estate. So the third estate, for instance, says, everybody should pay taxes, not just us. First estate would say, no. Second estate would say, no. The third estate would say, yes. Guess who won? 2 votes to 1 vote. First and second estate win. We think everybody should be able to hunt. Third estate votes yes. Second estate, no. First estate, no. 2 to 1. Third estate loses. So they were unhappy. The third estate continued to be unhappy. And then they knock on the door one day, and the first and second estate had locked them out. They were no longer going to even listen to the whining, complaining third estate, 98% of the population. Third estate was upset. And even though it was rainy and cold, they walked over to the tennis court. And they stood on that tennis court and they said, this stinks. We are not going to stop meeting, no matter what, until we get a constitution and get some rights. And so that's called the tennis court oath. That's a promise from the third estate to get a constitution and change things forever in Vive la France. One of the things the third estate did was they stormed the Bastille. The Bastille was a French prison and had a lot of different prisoners in it. They thought that there was gunpowder and weaponry in there, so they stormed it. They go attack the prison. And when they do so, they kill a bunch of guards. They don't really find any weapons. But they do start kind of this revolution. Look, we can overthrow or overpower that first and second estate if we want. This happened on July 14th, and it's called Bastille Day. It's their Independence Day, just like our 4th of July, right? Our 4th of July is like their 14th of July. That's their independence. So this is going to cause issues coming forward, right? Because of this conflict with the first, second, and third estate, heads are going to roll. France is going to change dramatically in the next couple of days. Okay, well, in a couple of days in world history, that is. So to recap, France, they had a king and 3 estates. First estate was the clergy, the church people. They collected tithes. They ran orphanages and schools and stuff. They didn't have to pay taxes. Second estate, rich guys, the nobles. They had a lot of property, a lot of money. They didn't have to pay taxes, and they could hunt. Third estate, they were getting kind of crapped on. That was everybody else. 98% of the population, they had to pay all the taxes. They couldn't hunt, and they had to work on stuff for free. They were definitely not equal, and that caused a problem when the first estate and second estate kept voting against them. The third estate was locked out of meetings, but they made that tennis court oath where they promised to get a constitution, and eventually they stormed the Bastille, where they overthrew this prison and killed a bunch of people, and that serves as their Independence Day. So I hope you get this. I know I was a little long-winded. Sorry about that, but I'll try to shorten it up maybe tomorrow, maybe not. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.